Andrew Yang has been caught laughing off some misogynist comments. I do want to have a bigger conversation about what this means. So let's play this.
Can a man keep his Timbs on?
Can a man keep his Timbs on?
Yeah. Can a man keep his Timbs on?
Oh my! I mean, I really. Oh Lord.
I'm in disbelief.
I think it's purely up to your partner, right? I mean, if your partner is cool with it.
That's what I'm saying.
I love Andrew Yang.
I don't know why I know why this bothered me so much, but I think what's really frustrating to me is, so he's like the guy who like wants everybody to like him. And when you're not willing to stand for something as simple as, dude, that's not appropriate, or, I mean, this, he's very likely, there's a new poll out today, he's leading with double digits, and the election's in 2 days. Piper, I mean, I think that if he was elected, he's gonna get impeached, but seems like nothing's sticking now. Am I wrong? Like, we can't hold our lawmakers accountable. Like, people don't care. It's like the next thing post-Trump era, like this, we're canceling the furthest left people out for the simplest of things. And yet our electeds who are going to make monumental decisions can be rapists on the left, supposed left, can say things like this, can have absolutely no policy experience. We know the list is.
What to make of this? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously my problems with Yang range from, first of all, obviously you don't want to see elected officials condoning jokes like this. And I guess one thing that I appreciated a lot about other campaigns that I've seen, you know, Bernie Sanders, for example, would shut questions like that down pretty quickly. And in fact, would shut down questions about his favorite music and say, no, I want to go back to the policy. You know, that's my ideal way of interacting with unserious questions for political candidates. And obviously, this is a pretty extreme example of that. I think specifically speaking beyond just this particular example of condoning this kind of misogynistic behavior, of condoning a misogynistic joke, it's also interesting to sort of put this in context with other of Yang's policies. I know I talk about housing policy all the time on the show, but this is actually, I think, very pertinent to Yang's candidacy as well, as the ways that he's obviously thrown out ideas about TikTok hype houses and has played with all kinds of housing ideas that just don't get down to the fact that what really needs to happen is like the full funding of public housing, and, you know, making sure that everyone in New York doesn't just get, you know, it's not just a tiny minimum wage for the smallest percentage of the most low-income New Yorkers. But obviously, if you want to be a really progressive leftist leader, that should also mean, you know, fighting misogyny, not only by shutting down questions like this, but by fighting for housing for all. Obviously, that goes beyond misogyny. It affects everyone. But it's more a matter of, you know, making sure that you also fight for real material needs for women and for their basic safety, their ability to leave unsafe situations. And, you know, I see an unsatisfactory answer from Yang here, and I also see an unsatisfactory answer in the arena of policy. So, you know, that's my thought.
He's completely unfamiliar with some basic components of how New York City government works. It's horrifying. This is like a completely horrifying situation. You know, Donald Trump was horrifying because he didn't know basic things. Andrew Yang is not as vulgar, although he was a little bit here. But I mean, this is a guy who had no problem leaving New York City during the economic crisis and saying, I couldn't imagine raising my kids in the middle of COVID in New York. I mean, a lot of people had to leave New York because they couldn't afford to live in New York. And he decided he was going to Westchester to raise his children, had no problem saying it. That's what's driving me crazy. He doesn't even understand what he's saying is disconnected from the realities at this moment in particular, where New York has already gone through a horrible economic crisis over the last 10 years, where income inequality is worse than any other city in America, where the housing crisis is at the top of the list with many other big, you know, cities, including Los Angeles and San Francisco and Miami and Chicago, we know, and Boston, of course. And through all this, he's the guy leading in the polls. I know, Esperanza, you're not in New York, but this is symbolic of obviously a much bigger problem we're facing in society.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my problems with Yang have stemmed back to the fact that his campaign is almost offensive. I mean, we as the working class in this country, our issues do not revolve around, you know, how much money we get per month. They're a lot deeper than that. And yet Yang sort of had this, type of compromise plan where he sort of like, I almost feel like he was like holding a scrap of meat in front of people, like, oh, here's $1,000 a month, vote for me. But really, his plan would not stop the accumulation and concentration of wealth and therefore power in the hands of fewer and fewer people, while the rest of us continue to have less of it. His plan would never have addressed the root issues of our problems. Now, in this case in particular, I mean, should we be surprised? These bourgeois politicians, their conception of power is not based on serving the people like a socialist or communist conception of power is. It's based in this narcissistic, self-serving, careerist type of, sort of elected official model, whatever you want to call it. But I think that what sort of angers me about this is, one, I don't take jokes about women to be funny ever. I'm from Southern California. I remember a few years ago, Zoraida Reyes, who was a transgender woman in the sex trade, was strangled by a sex buyer and left dead in her car. I remember U.S. Marine Scott Pemberton, who strangled transgender woman Jennifer Laud in the Philippines, and he was recently released. So, women is actually a part of violence against women. And it's interesting that leftist men will often be so critical of the mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN. But yet when it comes to pornography and sexualized images of beating, torturing, choking, killing women, raping women, somehow then, we cannot be critical of it, right? Otherwise, then that's sort of problematic territory. I think ultimately misogyny is baked into our culture. It's embedded within our society. And we need a sort of cultural revolution that can upturn that. And a reformist, capitalist, imperialist politician like Andrew Yang is not fit to do that. I also think that he tries to have this like bro-y appearance and just be okay with whatever goes. And I also think that's a super toxic attitude.
I just want to, pivot off of that bro-y thing, because there is this overlaps with this ecosystem that we talk about so much on the show, mainly because I'm just part of it, of YouTube politics or justice, all everywhere, right? The numbers are overwhelmingly male, like in the 80s and 90% percentile. And that is not something that is accidental. That is a design flaw, and it is exacerbated. And so tech companies are partners in facilitating this. There is an overlap. I mean, we understand how the gamer world has spilled into the online media world, and how the audiences have filtered over, or vice versa. Twitch is a perfect example, which we're on. But this isn't about it is not a symptom of something. This is something that is a design. And until we are able to hold these tech CEOs and these tech companies accountable and break them up, or demand that they change their algorithms, or have people who are more reflective of society, they're generating the conversation. Can you imagine Fox News having all male hosts and an all male audience? Because let me tell you something, their audience is more diverse and generating a conversation more diverse than this audience. And we have, and obviously Fridays is all women, and that's why we do this. But specifically, it's because like this wouldn't happen on cable news, and it's happening online right now. And real conversations are being driven and produced and like watched, and whatever the ratings are, they're driven by an almost overwhelmingly all male audience. And then it goes onto Twitter, and then women will get engaged and respond, but it is being generated. That is insane in 2021. Sorry, I'm getting off my soapbox. Piper, I can see you nod your head. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think in terms of creating like a more diverse space for women's voices in media, first of all, that seems absolutely essential. And I think that it allows people to bring up a more diverse range of experiences in order to identify. I mean, I personally feel that, having organized alongside people of all genders, that obviously we want people to be able to take up the fight of, collective resistance against misogyny, regardless of their gender. That's everyone's issue, much in the way that struggles against racism and struggles against transphobia are everyone's issue as well. And I think that I see such value in being able to include more women in the discourse, so that when we do have conversations between women talking about issues that women face, it's not just listening to, for example, Meghan McCain and Chelsea Clinton decide what women all over the world need, because I think the outcomes of that conversation certainly won't satisfy me. And I think they're sure to satisfy very, very few members of the working class.
Final thoughts, Esperanza?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's a problem when there's, sort of like male-dominated media spaces, et cetera. But I also think that we have to be very careful of this representation and diversity argument. I mean, this is what allowed Biden to paint himself as progressive in the primary when he was asked, will you have a female VP? What does it matter if you have a female VP if your female VP is against the interests of the masses of women around the world, right? I think it's sort of, I think about trans representation. I mean, is your trans representation someone like Charlotte Clymer, who's a running dog for US imperialism? Or is it somebody who actually represents the interests of the masses of people in that country, right, around the world? And so I think that the age of class-devoid identity politics has to end in 2021. We have seen it played against us so many times, whether from the Biden administration, from others. Like, it is time for us to demand that we do not talk about representation, diversity, or identity without anchoring it in class. And who does this ideology, who does this person serve? Do they serve the masses of people, or do they serve the ruling class?
And let's just be very clear. Many of these people are actually paid actors. They're being paid to represent and distort the conversation on behalf of the ruling class. It's not just that the representatives or people that come from the world, they're operatives in the ruling class. I mean, you look at the receipts and you're like, wait, we're all having, honest conversations online. They're being paid to disrupt the conversation and shift it in a different direction. Just like on Facebook, Ben Shapiro is getting rewarded and he's generating that conversation. It doesn't operate the same way.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.